You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at NoScheduleMan on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /NoScheduleMan. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
I've been known to struggle with reality. Not that it is.
Hi, I'm Kevin Bulmer. Thanks for joining me. I hope you're having a terrific day. Our guest today is Bruce Van Horn. Bruce is an author, speaker, teacher, and a coach who helps people to restory their passion, purpose, and vision. There were a number of things that caught my attention related to Bruce, including his podcast, which is called Life is a Marathon. Bruce is the creator and the host of that. He also has written a couple of books. One of them is called Worry No More, 4 Steps to Stop Worrying and Start Living. He also wrote You Can Go the Distance. It's a marathon training guide, and you'll hear in our conversation why that's relevant in a couple of ways. And yeah, there is a tie-in to the name of the Life is a Marathon podcast as well. Bruce offers an online course called Become a Twitter Genius. You can learn more about that on his website at brucevanhorn.com. I don't even think I told Bruce that's how I connected with him, was through Twitter. I wouldn't call myself a genius on it. I haven't taken Bruce's course yet, but I can tell you this. I'm really glad that he and I are connected now and that we spent this time together. And when you listen to what Bruce has to say, I think you'll be glad as well. As a speaker, Bruce does a number of different events, and at the time of this recording, he has one coming up called Restory You, Create the Life You Want. It's going to be a 2-day personal development workshop in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Now, I'm recording this at the beginning of October 2016. You might be listening to this at some point in the future, so that workshop may be well in the past by now. But just in case you're listening to this before the end of October of 2016, that workshop is going to be October 28th and 29th. As I said, in sunny Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Restory You, Create the Life You Want, a 2-day personal development workshop. And hopefully by the time you hear this, you'll have seen that was such a smashing success, and I've no doubt that it will be that Bruce has developed that in all sorts of other different locations. I certainly hope for that, both for Bruce and for everybody that he's going to help. I think he's going to help you just by listening to this conversation. Talking to Bruce, there were so many times I had a difficult time keeping quiet. And if you've listened to some of the other podcasts, you know sometimes I can interject a little bit too much. I know it drives me crazy too. I get excited when I start hearing these really empowering and passionate messages from people that have been through struggles and have overcome them and have really good things to share with you and with me. Well, when I was talking with Bruce, there were so many times I just wanted to yell, yeah, yes, exactly. We could take so much of what he talked about and I could apply that to my own journey. It's been different things, certainly different struggles, but some of the lights that have gone on and the realizations and then the lessons of maybe tools that you come across. Mental and emotional tools, I mean, that you can apply to your journey to be able to move forward. Boy, oh boy, there were so many things that Bruce said that really resonated for me, and I'm interested to see how much of it resonates with you, too. Here are a few key takeaways that I got from my time with Bruce, and there were a lot of them. Here are just 3. Number 1, in order to transform anything in your life, you need to first make the decision to do so. But here's the key. You need to make that decision more than once. Much more than once. Many, many times. More than once. I love the way that Bruce describes this particular point, so I won't say any more about it right here. I couldn't agree with him more, though, but listen for that about the amount of decision and the kind of decision and Bruce's understanding of that, of how to transform his life. Number 2, through all of the problems Bruce has had, and trust me, as you're going to hear, he's had some big ones along the way. He was able to boil it all down to recognizing that he really only had just one problem, what he called a Bruce problem. Now, if you know me, and especially if you follow along with my YouTube videos, you know I try not to use that word, problem, but it's a good word for this because once Bruce was able to identify it like that and then take total responsibility for his own experience, the Bruce problem, he was then able to reframe that problem into the words that I prefer more, challenge and opportunity. And as you're going to hear, Bruce has been more than up for each challenge and has found and created opportunity at each turn. And number 3, I love how Bruce said, stop criticizing yourself and start coaching yourself. I loved it when I heard him talk about this and how he finally recognized the negative voice in his head. And that once he did that, he was able to say to it, you're a liar. We've all got that voice, right? You can talk back to that voice. So when it starts chirping at you, you can't, you won't, that'll never work. Who do you think you are? Bruce recognized that and turned right around and stood up and said to that voice, you're a liar. And from there, he was free to believe about himself whatever he chose to believe. And you and I can do the exact same thing. So my suggestion, this will probably sound self-serving as it's my podcast, but I suggest you listen to this one closely and maybe take some notes. Bruce comes right out of the gates with all kinds of really powerful observations and suggestions that I think that you're going to find of great value. It would be easy to miss because it's so conversational, but just the way that he answers the first few questions as I was listening to him talk, I thought, that's a lesson, that's a lesson, that's a lesson, that's a lesson. See if you can pick some of them out. And then once you learn more about everything that Bruce has overcome, it'll throw all of that good stuff into even sharper perspective. Just trust me, listen through his story, you'll see. But you don't want to miss this one, and you probably have people in your life that you're going to want to share this with as well. Here's my conversation with Bruce Van Horn on the No Schedule Man podcast. Bruce, I often hear myself say to people that, yeah, they say that life is short, but based on my experience, I think life is also kind of long, too. Mm-hmm. So be careful about the choices that you're making today because you never know who's going to walk back into your life or what experience you're going to extract from your past that will be relevant today. So I was immediately intrigued when I came across somebody named Bruce Van Horn who had a podcast called Life is a Marathon. And I'm interested to see whether my thought of it jives with yours. What is Life is a Marathon all about?
Well, it really is about, it is not about running. Although I am a marathon runner, my podcast certainly is not about running. It is about a mental resiliency, this idea of having what it takes to go the distance. It really is about coaching, but it's about life coaching, not about running coaching. And I got the title from my own personal experience because I was in my early 40s. I was a miserable guy, and miserable to the point where I saw absolutely no hope of my life ever getting better. And so I was suicidal. I was really looking at bridge overpasses, trying to figure out which one was high enough to do the job. And during that period, my older brother actually challenged me to run a marathon with him. And I thought that was stupid. I had no interest in doing it, but I knew that I was marginally overweight, but I was incredibly out of shape. I was really having a hard time keeping up with my kids without having to stop every 15 minutes to catch a breath. So I started at least exercising. And then once I had some success with that, I took up his challenge and I started training for my first marathon. And it was during that process that I realized that, people think about running a marathon. They say, oh, I could never do that. Well, you actually can, unless you have some real physical issue. If you could walk around a mall for an hour, you can run a marathon. It's just about wanting to, but running a marathon is, I often will say 99, if not 95% mental. And if the brain says we're going to do this, and the brain has a significant why behind why we want to do it, the body will follow suit. It might not like it. It might grumble and groan and complain. But if the brain says, you know what, this is stupid, the body says, hallelujah, I've been telling you that. Let's go sit back on the couch. But if your feet are bleeding and screaming, let's stop, and your brain, your will, if you will, says, no, feet, I'm sorry you're bleeding, but we got 3 more miles to go, the feet will begrudgingly go the distance. And so I learned that my problem in life was I was looking for immediate satisfaction. I liked the microwave. Why would we cook something in an oven for an hour when I can microwave it for 15 minutes and be done? And I wasn't even getting any level of satisfaction, but it was during that training process. Marathon running actually saved my life because it completely turned my mindset around from that of being a victim to that of being responsible and accountable for my behaviors, for my attitude. And so that's really what the metaphor of life as a marathon is that, we don't know what life is going to throw at us from day to day. But have we done the kind of emotional preparation work? Have we trained in such a way? Our minds, our attitude. Do we have a destination in mind, first of all? And that's what happened to me. I had no goals anymore because I was just convinced I wouldn't hit any of them. And so if we have a destination, if we have a reason for why we're doing it, we can get through the difficulties of life.
The point you described to me sounds pretty dramatic, at looking at bridge overpasses and being just completely dissatisfied with your life. And then you go to the marathon that resonated with you, and to use your words and toss them back at you, Bruce, saved your life. What was it about the thought of running a marathon that pulled you forward and engaged you when you were at that far down?
Well, there were incremental processes in between there. And so that would have been my brother's challenge would have come in the fall of 2005. And so I at least joined a gym later that fall and started walking on a treadmill to get a little bit of exercise and get my heart going. And that felt okay. And then I started jogging on the treadmill, and that felt okay after a while, although it took me much longer to be able to jog a mile without walking than I thought it would. But then it started to become spring, and I live in Virginia. And so somewhere around the March time frame of 2006, I enrolled in a neighborhood 5K. And while I wasn't able to run the entire 5K without walking, I had a lot of fun doing it. And it got me out of the house. It got me interacting. I met other runners who were, very, very involved in the running community. So I started making new friends in the process. Then, because of that success, I enrolled in a 10K, and I had even better success with that. So it was at that point that I decided, you know what? I'm going to do this. I have no idea how it's going to turn out, but I'm at least going to take up my brother's challenge and run, at least train for the marathon. And during the training process, I encountered more success than I really thought I was going to. So there were lots of little victories along the way that I used as ample evidence to discredit the voice in my head, you can't do this. Because there was a point where I didn't think I could run a 5K, yet I did it. There was a point I didn't think I could do a 10K, but I didn't do it. So I started saying to that voice that says you can't do it, I started saying, you know what? You're a liar because I've just disproved you. I can do it.
One of the things that fascinates me, Bruce, is going back to the point for people in their journey where they make a decision, as you did, to get started, and where that comes from.
Yeah.
And because from that point on, I think that you're then conditioning yourself to turn your energy more to what you do want. It sounds like there was an intention there. As you started to gain a little bit of positive momentum, now you're reinforcing positives. But at what point in there did you start to become aware that that was happening?
It probably was not until I was, and I literally had an epiphany, an oh my God moment. Even though I was training well during the summer of 2006, so we're talking 10 years ago now, in my mind, I had already declared myself, and I saw myself, I visualized myself as a marathon runner. So that was already the persona I had taken on because my training was going well. And so in August of 2006, I was out for an 18-mile training run, And it was very, very early. I'm one of these guys. I like to get up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning and run, especially in the summer before it gets really hot. But earlier that morning, I was still a surly, grumpy, angry, pissed off guy. So if you had encountered me that morning in my bedroom while I was lacing up my shoes to go running, which I was getting a great amount of pleasure out of, but it was the only aspect of my life I was enjoying still. If you had said, Bruce, what's your problem? I would have been able to rattle off for you a very long list of exactly what my problems were. And I had a correspondingly long list of exactly who was to blame for it. And guess who was not anywhere on that list? Yours truly. I was in total victim mode. And it was during that 18-mile run that it occurred to me that I was able to completely transform my body. I was not overweight. I was absolutely not out of shape, because here I am on an 18-mile run and doing it quite well. I was able to transform that aspect of my life by changing my mind. And one of the things that I omitted from the story in my brother's challenge, when he said, Bruce, you should run a marathon, I said, there's no way I can do that. He said a phrase I didn't understand at the time, and I didn't believe at the time. He said, Bruce, the hardest part about running a marathon is making the decision to do it. And it was during that early morning in August 10 years ago that the aha moment was that my brother was right, but I misunderstood him. I thought he was talking about a decision you make once. But in order to change your life, it's a decision that you have to make absolutely every day. And I had been making the decision to transform my body. And it occurred to me that I didn't have all of these problems. I had marital problems. I had financial problems. I had, just self-esteem problems. And what occurred to me was I only had one problem. I had a Bruce problem. I had what Zig Ziglar would call a stinkin' thinkin' problem. And it occurred to me, Bruce, you're a marathon runner. And the only way you've been able to do that was by changing your thought and thinking positively and encouraging yourself that you can do this. If you can just apply that same mentality to the other areas of your life, there's a very high probability that those areas will transform just like your body has. And so that's what I set out to do. And, and it was a gradual process, because I had ingrained just negative self-talk, cynical. Yeah.
I'm pausing because I'm trying to decide which avenue of the many wonderful ones you've opened up to us already, Bruce, I want to go down. I hope that whoever is listening is paying close attention and making notes. I wonder what one of your workshops must be like, because in the last 10 minutes, you've already, in my opinion, delivered so many gems that so many of us can relate to. That
we do a lot of this in my workshops.
Well, yeah, you've, and maybe it's because I can relate with my own journey to so much of what you've expressed. I remember, I would put it this way, that I finally got to a point where I realized that every time I had a problem, I was there. And that was kind of a shattering realization that I arrived at somewhat reluctantly. But once you're able to face and embrace that, that's incredibly empowering, isn't it?
It is. Sometimes taking responsibility for your failures. I've got two boys, and I was a boy, right? You were too. We would rather, it's easier to blame somebody else. No, I don't know who broke the window, Mom. Honest. Oh, no, I didn't let that dog out. I don't know how he got out. Rather than say, yeah, I was playing ball and I broke the window. I'm sorry. Because it's easier to be a victim or blame somebody else for the problem. But once you do it, the reality is, as a victim, you are a prisoner to external circumstances changing. And what I realized was, you can't outsource marathon training. If it doesn't go well, it's nobody's fault but mine, because I overslept, or I chose not to get up and run. But as I've discovered, as I assume as close to 100% responsibility for every single thing in my life, the more power I have to change it. I might not like it, and it might be embarrassing for me to say, you know what, this financial situation that I'm in, this marital situation that I'm in is 100% my fault. Now, what am I going to do to start changing it?
That's a point that I had to arrive at as well, that, again, I'll use the word really empowering, but I think that when you say that, it can also be, I'm looking for the right vocabulary, Bruce.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine, Andy Andrews, he's a famous writer. He says, the bad news is your life has always been in your hands. The good news is your life is in your hands.
Well, I was going to ask you, and I'm skipping forward a little bit because I do want to take us back to give some more context, but to continue on this thread, I'm curious to ask you what your experiences are when you are speaking and you're doing workshops and you confront people with that notion, because I would assume, Bruce, not everybody wants to hear that.
Right.
They're thinking that, okay, here comes this guy and he's going to motivate us and make us feel great. And now you've just taken a gigantic bucket of water and told me that everything that's going on in my life is my responsibility, when I may be firmly ingrained in the victim mode. We'll use that, because I believe, in just my personal opinion, a large percentage of people are, because we don't know any different. I certainly would count myself among that group up until fairly recently. How do they react to you, Bruce?
Well, I get lots of different feedback from it. So first of all, somebody has already paid money to be in one of my workshops or hired me to be a life coach. They've already come to a certain level of understanding about what I'm going to say to them.
Right.
So there is that aspect, but I just have conversation with friends and family who encounter this. And, in so many ways, the saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, that really does hold true, because the truth of the matter is that I had lots of people throughout my life speaking into my life, basically saying the same things to me that I was saying to myself. I had been exposed to the teachings of Zig Ziglar and other motivational speakers early on. I just wasn't ready to hear any of it. So part of it is I've relaxed about the idea that I can change everybody's mind. So I personally, if you walk away from me and call me an idiot for believing that stuff, I'm just going to say, you know what? That's just where you are right now. I get it, because I had been there as well for many, many years of my life. Yet, if I can sit somebody down and explain to them, and I do this in parenting too. I do it with my boys and just say, if you can assume responsibility, even if it really wasn't your fault, if you'll still claim as much, because somebody might have heard me saying that if I can claim as close to 100% responsibility for my marital issues, someone might be thinking, well, doesn't it take two to tango? Aren't you only 50% responsible? Well, maybe, but if I assume more responsibility, then it empowers me to be able to make the changes that I can make. I cannot change another person, but I can at least change me and my level of acceptance about the idea. And there's somewhere else I want to go with that, but let me pause there and let you interrupt and redirect there.
Well, I am going to take us back prior to your early 40s in a minute, but with what you had just said, I've on the, shouldn't it only be 50%? I think I would offer there, let's see how you feel about it, Bruce, is that to really have a situation like a marriage thrive, you want two people at 100% coming at it.
Yes.
Because otherwise you're looking to fill that other 50, 30, 25%, whatever it might be, but some hole inside of you that I believe now through experience, trial and mostly error, of getting it wrong, that, looking for somebody else to validate or a substance or an activity. Whereas if I can come with my 100 and you can come with your 100, then we can really combine to make some magic together. But I've got to be willing to go all the way up to the top level. But at the same time, I can't give more than 100%, right, Bruce? Because then I'm out of integrity, because I'm now allowing that scale to be tipped beyond what I should be giving into it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we are also 100% responsible for what we allow or for what we tolerate. And most relationship difficulties stem around communication. And I can always assume 100% responsibility for what I did not communicate or what I allowed to go unsaid. That's always 100% my issue. So there's always that piece of it.
Let's go back then, Bruce, to the point before you described earlier about when you went from being in such despair to just starting to make baby steps forward in the form of training for the marathon initially. But what kind of summary can you give me about the 3+ decades that was before that? What did your life look like, and what led you to being in such a dark place?
Yeah, and that's actually pretty easy. I was, I was born like a lot of people into middle class America. We were not rich, we were not poor, we were just very comfortable. So my parents are, in their 80s, and they're still married 55 years later. So I can't even say I was the victim of a broken home or anything. But somewhere along the line, I had a very low self-image. I had a very poor self-esteem. Part of the reason was I was actually very small as a boy. When I was 16 years old and got my first driver's license, I was 5'1", 115 pounds. So I had already at 16 years old convinced myself that no girl's going to want to go out with a shrimp. And I was. It wasn't until I was almost 18 years old that I started growing, and I grew 8 inches that year. So I'm still not tall by any standard, but when I was young, or probably about the time I was 14 or 15 years old, I was infatuated with writing and reading. And I had decided that all I ever wanted to be was a writer. So I did very well in English classes in high school. I went to college and I studied English creative writing. I wrote a lot. I won lots of national writing competitions. And then, so what is a guy who's all he's ever wanted to be in life was a writer and has won these competitions? What does he do when he graduates? Well, of course, he takes a job in high-tech computer sales with IBM. That's what I did. Now, there are a couple things that connect it to make a little bit more sense. But what I did was I abandoned, and I didn't do it intentionally. I lied to myself that making money would be what would support my creative side, that I wouldn't be the starving artist. But I did. I went right into corporate America. I went right into sales. And part of the problem was that right out of the bat, I was really good at it. And so in my very early 20s, I was making way more money than any of my peers. And I was making more money than some of the people who had worked at IBM for 20 years. And that all sort of fed my ego. And it fed my ego to the point where when I was 27, a friend that I thought he was a friend then, and he was well-meaning. I wouldn't say anybody ever set out to intentionally hurt me, but he fed my ego and got me to start my own business. And because I took a lot of really bad advice and I ignored a lot of really good advice, because all I was interested in was making as much money as I possibly could, as fast as I could make it, I found myself 2 years later sitting in federal bankruptcy court, having lost absolutely everything I had earned in the previous 5 or 6 years of my life. And that was a huge blow to my already fragile ego. And to the rest of the world, I came off as very self-confident, very sure of myself. It was all a mask. I was terrified that somebody would discover deep down inside there was still this little teeny tiny Bruce Van Horn who he himself didn't believe he was good enough or strong enough or fast enough or rich enough or handsome enough. And so I was always overcompensating. I was always trying to earn validation by being the best at whatever I did. And I even went into my marriage that way. And, even though I'm now divorced for a big variety of reasons, it was never fair to her. She could never have been the person I was asking her to be, because all I was ever asking her to be was somebody who was constantly telling me how awesome I am. I was always looking for validation. Anytime I did really well at work, there was this desire to make money, but it was ultimately a desire to earn the praise of my boss and my peers. And when I didn't get that, then I had more self-esteem issues, and I had to try harder and I had to try harder. So I was on this constant treadmill of always feeling I had to do more and I had to give more and prepare more. And so that's a tough, that really is not something you can sustain for any reasonable period of time. Then mixed in with that, my wife, in and of her own self, not even in addition to the unfairness I was bringing to the relationship, she had substantial mental health issues. And so even if I didn't have my issues, our marriage would have been extremely stressful, simply because she was in and out of psychiatric hospitals most of her adult life. And so I was having to take care of her. And then we wound up having kids. And in between my two boys, who are now 19 and 13, we lost a daughter, tragically, in the year 2000. And so dealing with the death of my daughter, and I know it's hard for you Canadians and, those in the UK to understand the American healthcare system, but I was indeed woefully underinsured for that. And it cost us over $1 million to try to keep her alive. And we lost that battle, and the insurance companies paid the vast majority of it, but still my portion of the medical expenses, there was just no way I could pay them off. And so I wound up filing bankruptcy yet again when I was 40. And so really struggling with, how do I balance work? How do I balance taking care of my wife and her mental health issues? How do I emotionally deal with the death of a daughter? That's really what brought me to my knees, and realizing that, if you had asked me who I was, I could only have answered that question by the roles that I played, because I had no self-identity. I had an identity as a husband. I had an identity as an employee. I had also started more businesses, so I was an employer. So I had all of these roles that I played were my identity. And when there are problems in those roles, if those are your identity, you have an identity crisis. And when you've got problems in all of the roles that you're playing, your marriage, your ability to provide financially for your family, you've got the perfect storm. And that's where I was. And I was not doing anything to fill my own tank. So I was an automobile running with no oil in the engine. I was totally depleted on every single level of my life, emotionally, spiritually. I was just done.
You're speaking very eloquently with a lot of self-awareness that
I did not have then.
You finished my thought, Bruce, that I was going to say that I think is acquired through the benefit of experience and then spoken with hindsight.
And doing some deep soul searching.
Yeah.
And that taking accountability and responsibility. I mean, it took me years to get to the point where I was just able to tell you how culpable I was for my marriage issues. I flatly denied that for years and years and years and blamed it all on her.
Yeah, I've got stories of my own that are similar, but I started this conversation by saying, here's something that I hear myself saying, which was in reference to life is short, but it's also long. But another one that I hear myself saying is that I didn't really realize at the time that I was going through the first part of my life that I wasn't happy. I just thought that was how it was. Now, certainly when you are dealing with something as tragic as losing a daughter and some of the other things that you mentioned, you're aware that you're going through very difficult times.
Oh, yeah.
But on a day-to-day basis, what was the awareness like in terms of knowing or not knowing that the difference between, oh, this is just the way life is, or no, I really am unhappy, which eventually brought you to the point that we're going to get back to, where you you were suicidal before you started running. What can you remember of that time of how you were feeling, kind of like from a self-awareness perspective? Is it fair to say that you were even just kind of surviving at that point?
I was just surviving. I often use the equation that I felt like that 5'1", 115-pound weakling in a boxing ring with the heavyweight champions of the world, so pick one, Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, and I was just getting pummeled. And so just trying to survive and, without any hope of ever winning this fight. My goal was literally just to survive enough for the bell to ring at some point so I could crawl to my corner, get a drink of water. And in doing that, I also had this mindset that if anything good happened to me in my life, that was the bell that rang and gave me the 2 minutes of respite. And then I knew I'd have to go back out into the ring to get pummeled again. So I told myself, Bruce, anything good that happens in your life, do not celebrate it because it will be taken away from you. You will lose it. And so, Kevin, we are, and I didn't realize it then, but we are hope-shaped creatures, meaning that our hope about the future is what gives us energy and drive to live in the moment. So if we don't believe in life ever, if we don't believe that there's even the possibility that life will get better, it's not so much a question of why would I commit suicide or why would it, let's just call it that. The question is why not? Why wouldn't I? If there's nothing of hope to live for. And that's where I was. And so little by little, marathon running was God's gift to me to give me some hope and to show me that there were victories along the way and ultimately to give me my self-awareness.
As you were going along that path and starting to gain some momentum emotionally in a positive fashion through the running initially, what started to happen professionally? Were you still selling and doing things that didn't align with who you really felt you were?
Yes, absolutely I was. And even though I wasn't working for a big company anymore, in 1997, I had started my own software company with a business partner, of which I'm still a part owner, even though I'm just a silent partner in it now. But that's what I was doing. And I had also tricked myself into believing that because I was good at something, I equated that with my passion. But looking back on it, even though I was really good, and I had actually transitioned from selling into actually doing the actual software development, I was a really good, and still am, a really good software developer. But even though I was good at it, it drained me. I never got up in the morning just super excited about writing code. I was good at it, and I could do it, and it got the job done. But it always drained me. So somewhere along the process, actually a couple years after my first marathon, I woke up in a cold sweat, having had a nightmare about sitting down back when I was in college with one of my writing professors who said, Bruce, I'm really worried about this career choice you've made to go to work for IBM. I think it's going to cause you to step away from your real passion and purpose and calling in life. I had in this dream, my English professor was saying, Bruce, you're better than any student I've ever had. This is what you were made to do. And the reason that it was such a scary dream at that point was because it actually happened and I had completely forgotten it. And I had actually completely forgotten I ever wanted to be a writer. And so that was a wake-up call for me, and I started writing again, and I started falling back in love with that side of my passion. And I started, the thing that really changed me professionally was I was no longer a grumpy, surly, angry, pissed-off guy. I was actually sort of walking with a little spring in my step. I was still doing work I didn't really like, but I was making money again. And that was okay. And I had a guy, we weren't even friends, but his son and my son played on the same soccer team and had for many years. And he came up to me and he said, Bruce, there's something different about you this year. Tell me your story. What's going on? And, we were just on a first name, hey, how you doing basis. So I started telling him about this transformation that had taken place in me. And he said, well, I don't know how you've done it, but whatever it is you've got, I want that in my life. And I'd like to hire you to be my life coach. And I had never even heard the phrase before. So I said, what in the world is a life coach? So he told me his idea. And I said, well, that sort of sounds like a combination between a psychotherapist, a pastor, and a best friend. He said, yeah, pretty much. But anyway, I started meeting with him every single week. And then he referred me to two of his friends who lived out of town. And they referred me to people. And I found my passion of being able to help people. I discovered that because I've had so many life experiences that I thought were negative and harmful and things I would never want for anybody to ever go through. I discovered that those were actually gifts. The death of my daughter was actually a gift to me because I now am able to speak to other people who are experiencing similar things with deep, deep understanding and compassion. And so I came alive when I coach people. And I was recently talking to a guy I went to high school with and haven't seen for 35 years and told him what I was doing. He said, oh, well, that's a no-brainer. All of us were completely shocked when you went into computer sales because back in high school, even though you were small and whatever, you were always wise beyond your years. You were always the guy we could come and talk to about our problems, and you would say something that would make us feel better. And I had completely forgotten that aspect of my life. And so, yeah, my life really did change, and I started writing, I started coaching, and I backed more and more away from the software side of my life and into the writing and coaching and using my real gifts part of my life. And the thing that got really interesting was, we like inertia. And, the law of inertia being, an object at rest stays at rest, an object in motion stays in motion. And so just like when my life was horrible and all these bad things were happening, I was convinced that because of the law of inertia, those negative bad things would continue to happen in my life. Now, the opposite happens too. When things are going great, we tend to think that everything is going to keep going great for the rest of our lives. How often does it?
Well, then you get to a point where there's something that I read on your website. Yeah, I've got it right here where it says, I've learned that I cannot control many things about my life, but I control how I respond to everything. And I would look at that responding versus reacting. So one way to continue the positive momentum is that when those waves and speed bumps, some of them can be earthquakes when they do come along. You're right back to where we were about 20 minutes ago, right, Bruce? You can take responsibility and choose how you want to respond, whether you want to be hauled all the way back or take a bit of a pause and then choose how you want to absorb that and start moving forward again.
Exactly. Because 2 months after I knew that coaching and writing was what I wanted to do full time. I knew software development was a distraction to me, so I stepped away from my business entirely. I still maintained my ownership, but I stopped any hands-on involvement in it. And then I got a phone call on February 17th of 2014, so just 2.5 years ago, from my doctor. And when your doctor calls you and he's holding back tears, that's never good news. And he told me that I had stage 4 prostate cancer at age 50, which is almost statistically impossible. And so I knew then that my life was taking a completely different trajectory, and it wasn't going to be the smooth, level uphill climb of success. Yet I reminded myself that I got to choose, and I could have made the choice to go back into that negative, don't celebrate anything because it's never going to last. Or I could make a choice to say, you know what? I don't know how this turns out, but there's enough evidence from my past to tell me that I believe that those previous things were gifts. There's a gift in here somewhere. I don't know where it is, but I'm going to trust that there is one. And I had to sit down and explain that to my boys because at this point, it had only been a couple months since I had 100% custody of them. My wife's mental health got dangerously out of control to the point where it was no longer safe for any of us to be around her, and she had to be hospitalized. But that's another story. So I now have full custody. I am the sole support system for these two boys. And I had to sit them down and I said, your dad just got a really not great cancer diagnosis, but I believe we're going to get through this. I still see myself crossing the finish line of life, and cancer isn't part of that. But there's a gift in here. There's a teaching. And I believe somehow or another, this is going to make us all stronger. And so it was with that energy that I went through the dealing with cancer process.
You've helped me answer something that I had been intent on asking you, as there are a couple of photos displayed on your webpage, one of you in a hospital bed in April of 2014 and another beside it of you running in April of 2015. The fact that you and I are chatting here today tells me how things have turned out. Yeah. And now I know what those photos were about, or certainly what the...
the story that happened there was my cancer was advanced, but it was operable. But there were complications that happened during the surgery that nobody foresaw. And I don't believe that anybody almost dies. I believe that we either do or we don't, but somehow or another we need vocabulary to talk about the significance of what happened. And so my doctors and nurses said, well, you almost died today because you lost over 70% of your blood during the operation. We lost your heartbeat, blood pressure. And what should have been an hour and a half surgery was a 5-hour surgery to try to put you all back together. And during the process of that, which was brutal, my recovery process from that, I would not wish on anybody, because I actually had to do massive abdominal surgery with absolutely no pain medicine because of some of the complications that took place. They weren't able to give me the pain medication. And again, I had more epiphanies during that process. But shortly after that, my surgeon came to me and he said, Bruce, I know you're an avid runner. I know you love running. And maybe in about a year, given the amount of cutting that we had to do, given the amount of blood that you lost, give yourself 7 months, but probably closer to a year before you even start jogging again. And so exactly 1 year when he told me I should be to the point where I might start jogging again, I ran the Boston Marathon. His agreement with reality was not in keeping with my agreement with reality. And he continues to be blown away by just how well I have come back from this.
How is your health now, Bruce?
My health is perfect. I continue to test cancer free, and I've gone on to run other marathons. So it's been great.
This subject fascinates me. You and I could do several sessions on it alone, but the idea of everything being energy and where the condition of our cells and all of that come from, and how we can affect it. But the attitude that you've chosen, and I'll stop myself there and just say that I'm just so glad that it's worked out the way that it has.
And the blessing, the thing that, I'm still discovering gifts, but out of the surgery process, I learned a lot more about myself than I ever thought. I thought I had done a lot of self-actualization and self-realization work prior to the cancer. And it was sort of like God saying, no, you've still got some big lessons to learn. And here's what I'm going to teach you. And so out of that experience, I was actually in the process of writing 2 different books when I got the diagnosis. Still have not gotten back to writing those books because my life is on a different trajectory. But I wound up writing my last book called Worry No More, which has touched the lives of people all around the world. But I also, out of that experience, started my podcast called Life is a Marathon, which I was not doing prior to cancer surgery. And as you said that you've experienced, the podcast, other than being a dad, has been probably the single most rewarding thing that I've ever done in my life, because the podcast is phenomenally successful, more so than I thought it would ever be. 1.5 million downloads in 203 countries around the world. And, the emails that I get from people from all different cultures, not just ours in North America, but I get emails and messages from Africa and from Kuwait and Iran and Iraq and the United Arab Emirates, just thanking me for speaking about these things where it's very much not talked about.
How far along before the health woes in 2014, and forgive me, health woes doesn't seem to be a term that does that justice,
fine.
but you know what I mean.
Sure.
How far along that line were you on you had been doing a little bit of life coaching, you had rediscovered, I'm thinking by that time, your passion for writing, and because I'm looking now as Bruce Van Horn being the person that helps people restore their passion, their purpose and vision. You've mentioned the podcast, one of your books. I know you offer a course as well. How much of that had developed by the time that you had that cancer challenge?
Well, I was doing a significant amount of life coaching, and I was writing. I was doing some consulting for businesses. So I would say, I really thought I was at the top of my game. And then I got knocked down again, and only to realize that I've bounced back even higher than I was prior to the surgery. And I have an even more elaborate vision for my life now than I did even before then. So I had already written one book prior to cancer. And, it was successful. It actually was a marathon training book. My book called You Can Go the Distance is a marathon training book, but it's really all about the mindset of running a marathon. And so I've had people who are paralyzed read my book and apply it to their lives, even though that they will never in real life run a marathon because they're bound to a wheelchair. They may do a wheelchair marathon at some point, but it really is a mindset and a going the distance mentality book. I was doing well and was happy with where my life was prior to cancer. And now after the fact, I realized that it was, like I said, it was like the universe saying, Bruce, you've set your bar too low. We're going here.
So tell me about, if you would, Bruce, describe the calling to do a podcast and why life is a marathon.
Well, I had actually had people encourage me to do a podcast, and I'm an auditory learner, so I love audiobooks. And I listened to a lot of podcasts as part of my personal development. So there's some great people out there who have been very instrumental in my personal development. And I had some people say to me, Bruce, you should do your own podcast. But it didn't feel, it was like, yeah, I can do that. I would probably be successful at it. But I was already in this process of eliminating from my life average. I believe I had made a decision that I was going to start living my life in either a yes or a no. And if it was just, oh, yeah, that could be interesting, I say no to those opportunities. And what it does is it frees me up from by eliminating, that would be interesting. By eliminating those things, it makes room for the awesome things in my life. So I tend to live more in black and white as far as how do I feel about doing something. And yet after the cancer, I had this new vision about where I wanted to go with my life, what I wanted to do. And again, somebody suggested, hey, Bruce, what do you think about a podcast? And it was an epiphany. A light bulb went off, and it was one of those, oh, heck yes. That is exactly what I just knew intuitively that that's what I needed to do. And the Life is a Marathon name just came. It was just, I had already used it as my personal tagline on my website, Life is a Marathon, so let's train for it. So I was already saying that on my website as my personal tagline because I was doing the type of writing and talking about mental endurance and mindset and all of that. But the podcast, it just made crystal clear sense now.
What was it like when you got started?
It was, I'm 275 episodes into it. We just celebrated our second birthday, September 14th, 2014, is when I launched my first episode. And I look back, I listen back at it now, and it's like, oh, really? And my shows aren't like yours. Most of my shows are monologues. It's just me talking. And I had completely written out my first episode, and I read it. It's like, oh my goodness. But that's still a very popular episode, and it gets people in touch with me, and they still write to me saying, I love that episode. I don't get it. I cringe when I go back and listen to it. But there was just, I had no idea it would be as successful, but I knew that it was something that I needed to do, if for no other reason, part of my own growth. And in doing 275 episodes, I often tell people, I said, you are welcome to listen in to what I have to say, but this is Bruce's self-therapy session. Most of the time I am preaching to me, because these are the things I still need to work on in my life.
Tell me a little bit about Worry No More, the 4 steps to stop worrying and start living, the book that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, worry is something that plagues, the vast majority of people on the planet. And worry is a story that we tell ourselves. And it occurred to me there are 4 steps that I outline in the book to eliminating worry. And they were, it's all, none of this is theory for me. It is how has Bruce turned this around? Because when I got my diagnosis, I obviously was worried about who would provide for my boys if I'm not around. When I came out from under the surgery, and there were a whole lot more people, doctors and machinery around me than they told me were going to be when I went into the surgery and realized things had not turned out well, I could have started the cycle of worry. And I knew that would not do me very much good. So I needed to figure out on the fly, how do I control my thought process? And realizing that worry is just a story. It is a thought. It's basically realizing that I am a movie director. I am a script writer. I'm a set designer, and everything that I visualize about the future is 100% in my control. And so somebody who says, oh, I just can't stop worrying. Well, that's a lie. You may have developed a habit of worrying, but you can indeed stop. And so I lay out some processes by which I was able to control the worry in my life.
I'm curious to get your thoughts, Bruce, on now that you've come so far from everything that you've been so kind and generous to describe, to feeling so much better, overcoming some incredible challenges, both with your health and certainly with everything that you mentioned, with your marriage and your daughter and everything else. You've got so much great experience and such a wonderful perspective, in my opinion, to be able to share and help empower, and to use your word, to help people re-story for themselves. But I'm curious, and there's a bit of the selfishness in why I'm asking this, Bruce, because okay. I've done a little bit of this myself. So I'm almost asking this to you as a bit of a mentorship. How do you find that you balance how you feel about providing potential answers and solutions to other people when you know that you're still asking questions for yourself?
Oh, I don't think that anybody has all of the answers. So I think that, I think that we approach people at different phases of life, so I still have, Bruce has a coach, so there is somebody that I still go to for guidance and encouragement, because in my opinion, she is farther along the process of self-realization. But also just knowing that we each have unique giftings. We have experiences. There are probably things that I can speak into your life because I have a perspective that in the midst of what it is you're going through, you might not have that perspective. It doesn't mean, look at coaches in athletic, here, look at basketball coaches. The coaches of a basketball team aren't better basketball players than their players. They just have the ability to instruct, the ability to say, you know what, try it this way. Or I've been watching you shoot in this way, and I'm noticing that you're doing this little thing with your hip that's throwing you off balance that you might not be aware of. So as you start to tell me your story, I've just been gifted in a way that I can listen to the words that you're saying, and I can say, Kevin, why don't you try talking to yourself this way, or look at it from this angle, and maybe you'll get a different perspective. So I need that. We all need that. And we all have areas of giftedness. And so that's how I would speak to that. I am still a work in progress, and I have needs as well. So I think everybody just comes to that.
I'm reminded of thinking of close friends, and hopefully we're all lucky enough to have them, where they'll call us up when they're looking for some outside perspective on something. And it's interesting how some of those instructions can come quickly when we're trying to genuinely help and support our friends and family and those we love. And yet when it comes time to tell those same things to ourselves, it's a little bit more challenging to find the same voice. You find that too?
Oh yeah, this is why we have the phrase "physician, heal thyself."
Yeah,
and we do that, and that's one of the things that I like about my own podcast is that I very much am talking through issues that I deal with. So we're all in this human experience together, and just learning how to. The one thing that I have learned to do in the process is be really kind to myself. My boys would not like to be around me very much if I was every single day telling them what they were doing wrong. Yet we have our own inner dialogue that criticizes ourselves and beats ourselves up, reminds us of our mistakes. And so one of the things that I've just learned how to do is to stop criticizing myself and start coaching myself and encouraging myself. Say, okay, well, this time that maybe wasn't the best effort, or, that wasn't maybe the best way to have approached that situation. Next time, let's try it a little differently. I've tried, one of my favorite phrases comes from a friend of mine. He lives in the UK, so it's really fun to hear him say it with his, thick British accent. But he says, Jamie Smart, he says, Bruce, if being hard on yourself was going to have worked, it would have worked by now. Yeah, it would have worked by now. How about trying being kind and loving to yourself? Let's try that out.
I was going to ask you what you might leave as a thought to someone that's listened to us this far. I think that the one that you just delivered is probably as good a spot to encourage people to jump off as any. Would you agree?
I would agree. What I do is I think back to, it's a standard question. What would you say to your teenage self? And what I would say to my teenage self would be, Bruce, you're enough. You are smart enough. You're strong enough. You're fat. You are what you are supposed to be. Stop seeking the approval of other people and trust who and what you are. Trust your plan, your purpose in life. You were created for a reason. Trust that and tend to move with the energies of life rather than trying to fight them.
You can connect with Bruce Van Horn online at his official website, brucevanhorn.com. His last name is spelled Vanhorn. There's no E on the end there, okay? brucevanhorn.com. Last name again, Vanhorn, brucevanhorn.com. And from there, you'll find all the links to all the episodes of his Life is a Marathon podcast. You can subscribe to that podcast for free in a number of ways. The easiest way to do that is to just go right to that website. You can also connect with Bruce on Twitter at BruceVH. Same handle on Facebook, facebook.com/BruceVH. Go look Bruce Van Horn up and say hello. I know that he'd be glad to hear from you. I'd be happy to hear from you as well, so slide by noscheduleman.com. That's the main hub for all things I'm up to. Would love to have you sign up for the new No Schedule Man email VIP group as well. Please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, rate it and review it, or leave a comment on the YouTube feed at youtube.com/NoScheduleMan. Thanks again for spending some time with me. We'll catch you next time on the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little day.